Hello, YouTube. Recently, there was a debate between the leaders of the various provincial political parties in Ontario because there's been a snap election called. And the first topic in that debate was on tariffs.
What makes you the right leader to respond to the tariff threat?
Obviously, the tariff threat was really big news in Canada. Donald Trump, the American president, threatened to impose a 25% across the board tariff on Canadian goods. He claims that Canada has been taking advantage of the United States through a trade deficit, which doesn't really make a ton of sense. That's not like a trade deficit is not a subsidy. He says he's been subsidizing Canada. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Not an actual thing, but the threat of a 25% tariff is a huge deal because Canada does so much trade with the United States. It's a huge part of our economy. And our economy is already struggling in the first place. So it would have been pretty devastating, I think. And so not only was just the threat of that like a really big deal, but then in the response to it, there's been a huge surge in like Canadian patriotism, and everybody's saying buy Canadian. And now the Liberal Party, which was really struggling in the polls, has had a huge surge. Justin Trudeau's out, Mark Carney's in, and that's also been a big factor. So a lot of geopolitical issues at play here. Now, my opinion, which is very much a minority view, basically not represented at all in the Canadian discourse, my opinion is basically trade pacifism, or more appropriately, unilateral free trade. So what I advocate for is simply Canada eliminating all tariffs and quotas on the import of foreign goods, which we don't have a huge tariffs anyway. I think the average tariff rate is like 1% or something. It's not big, but there is like certain industries like dairy. There's this thing called supply management where Americans are only allowed to export so much dairy, at which point there's like an insane quota or tariff that makes it non viable. So I would definitely eliminate supply management. I mean, it makes no sense. It's just, I mean, it makes sense if you look at it from the perspective of the liberals and the conservatives are in the pocket of the dairy farmers, okay? But it makes no sense from any other perspective, because, like, why would you have a policy that benefits like 1,000 dairy farmers in Quebec but hurts everybody else, including like low-income families that are trying to afford groceries, right? Because supply management raises the cost of dairy substantially. Anyway, so my position is unilateral free trade and no response to the tariffs. The majority view is we got to have retaliatory tariffs. You know, he hits us, we hit them back. And the problem I have with that viewpoint is that you're hurting Canadians. If you impose retaliatory tariffs on the import of American goods, that's going to drive up the price for Canadians. That's the whole point. And then their argument is, okay, but it's going to hurt, American producers. They're going to target states where Republicans are vulnerable, which I don't think it's a great argument because what does Donald Trump care anyway? But also, like, our tariff policy shouldn't be in the hands of foreign powers. What are you going to do if they don't reduce the tariffs in response? Are you just going to keep the tariffs high forever? Like, if you understand that's a bad policy, you don't want to do that. And it's just a game of chicken. I think the better approach is just unilateral free trade. And if they impose tariffs, say, okay, that sucks, but we're not going to do anything. Take like a Pacific, just trade pacifism, unilateral free trade, whatever you want to call it, they're all going to be united on this opinion. I think we'll see.
Well, this election, folks,
I mean, the question's not really about tariffs too; it's about leadership also. So we'll see what they say.
is all about leadership. It's who do you believe is going to protect your family, protect your businesses, protect jobs, and protect your community. It's about who you believe is going to protect Ontario. We've seen what President Trump's tariffs will do, and we're going to see what President Trump is going to be like for the next 4 years. If these tariffs go through, no matter if it's next month, next year, I can tell you one thing, they'll devastate the economy. But I can promise you, we will get through it. We'll get through it together. We'll be more united than ever before because we already have a base on our economy. We have a strong base. We're going to expand our economy, diversify our trade, bring companies in from all over the world, just like we've done for 7 years. Over $70 billion of investment have come to Ontario, 850,000 jobs. And I can tell you, I will fight like I've never fought before to protect the people of Ontario.
All right, Doug Ford, that is your time. We'll turn to Marit Stiles. What makes you the right leader to respond to the tariff threat?
Well, thank you, and hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm Marit Stiles, and my promise to you, first of all, is as Premier, I'm going to be on your side, fighting rising costs. When I moved to Ontario more than 30 years ago, where I grew up in Newfoundland, Ontario was a place of opportunity, but not today. After 7 years of Doug Ford and the Conservatives, the cost of everything is through the roof. There's been bad deals, waste, and of course, lots of promises, but nothing really delivered. As we face this big threat from Donald Trump, something we've never faced quite to this extent before, Doug Ford quit his job. Well, I'm applying for that job. And my promise to you is this: we're going to fight the rising costs. We're going to hire doctors and fix the healthcare crisis. We're going to build the affordable housing that people need. And we are going to make sure we protect and defend every job in every industry. That's my commitment to you.
Really on topic here. I don't really see what their response to the tariff threat would be. Not that the Premier of Ontario can really do that much about tariffs anyway. But that's the thing I hate about political debates is you're not really supposed to answer the question. You're just supposed to say stuff that will resonate with the electorate. CTV News asking the hard-hitting questions.
Many serious subjects on our agenda tonight, but we also want to help you, the voter, understand the person behind the politician. So we have some quick personal questions. I'll just ask the candidates 30 seconds each to those leaders. I'll start with Bonnie Crombie. What was your first job? What did it teach you?
Oh, great. So I got a job when I was 14. I lied about my age. I was a cashier at Woolco, and I did a lot of retail at the mall and jean shops. And then I worked in a home decor store for many years. So I always had a...
I got to say, Bonnie Crombie, pretty good looking for an older lady.
Part-time job. I wanted to contribute to the family income, and I wanted to be able to, pay for my own expenses. I think it's so important that our young people, if they can find a job today, go out and work and contribute.
If they can find a job is right. Teenage unemployment, youth unemployment in Ontario, sky high because of the recent minimum wage hikes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up on a farm, and my first job was feeding cattle, driving a tractor, and driving a combine, probably at an age that my parents would admit was far too young. But they didn't pay me for that because that was my contribution to the family farm. So my first job was...
You got paid in room and board, kid.
Actually, my father loaned me the money to buy a lawnmower. And I went out and mowed people's yards and brought some money home for myself. And I learned how to be an entrepreneur. And I've been an entrepreneur most of my life, and I'm really proud of what I learned as a kid from my parents.
All right, Mike Schreiner, thank you.
Healthcare usually features prominently in Canadian provincial debates. It's a huge, important topic. Substantial amount of the provincial budget goes to funding healthcare. In Canada, we've got universal healthcare, aka socialized medical insurance, aka socialized medicine. So the basic model, there's some regional variations, but the basic model is the government picks up the tab and like doctors bill the government, hospitals bill the government. I think the Canadian model is pretty bad. I mean, we're a first world country and we spend a ton of money on healthcare. So it's not like horrible, but for how much we pay, I don't think we're really getting value for the money. If you compare Canada to other OECD nations or to the G7, or especially to the G7, I think our healthcare system is towards the bottom. Canada is basically the only first world country that has only public sector healthcare for what's called primary care. So in Canada, like dental and eyeglasses and prescription drugs, that's all private. But anytime you go to the doctor or the hospital, that's always paid for by the government. So it's public in that sense. Technically, doctors are like their own businesses, but their only client is the state. There's a very, very small amount of private primary care in Canada, something like 1%. Like it is absolutely negligible. Other countries, France and Germany, they've got more of a mixed market economy, healthcare market, where they've got private primary care as well as public primary care. Anyway, Canadian healthcare system is a mess. It's extremely expensive in terms of like percent of GDP spent on healthcare. Outcomes are not that great. You've got pretty high bounce rates, like people that go to the emergency room and then leave without being treated. And on objective metrics, like physicians per 100,000 or hospital beds per 100,000, we've usually ranked pretty low, although I think that has improved in recent years. But the fundamental problem is that socialized medicine is untenable. You really need to have a healthcare market in order to have the best results. And one of the things they're trying to do in Canada is to nationalize pharmacare. That is to have prescription drugs paid for by the government, not people. And I think this would be a disastrous policy if it was implemented in full. They've done like a trial balloon or a trial program where diabetes medicine and birth control are going to be covered. But if it was like full pharmacare, I think for one, you would see a lot more people on drugs, on prescription drugs, because the cost is a factor. And this is just the wrong way to think about health and to go about health. I mean, absolutely, once you have a disease, once you have a health condition, you do need the Western medicine approach to handling it. But what you really want to do is not get sick in the first place by having a healthy lifestyle. So that's really where efforts should be targeted. Like the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the focus should be more on lifestyle changes.
Bonnie Crombie, the first question to you. 2.5 million people in this province do not have a family doctor. We see the strain on emergency rooms. You all have different proposals for a fix. What timeline? When can people expect to have dedicated primary care?
Yeah. Within 4 years, David, is the answer. So I talk to people across the province and they tell me they're afraid to get sick. They're really worried that the worst thing that can happen to them is to have to need a family doctor because they know they might not have one available. That's not the kind of Ontario that I believe in. The kind where 2.5 million people don't have a family doctor, 11,000 are waiting for surgery or care or treatment, or people in the north have to drive 4 or 5 hours to see their family doctor. And that's because Doug Ford doesn't believe in our public health care system. One of the things that make us so proud to be Canadian. It's time for a change. A vote for Ontario's Liberal.
So this is the argument made by leftists that we need more funding for public health care and just spend more and spend more. But I don't think that'll actually get you better results. It's not like you can just pour money into the healthcare system and expect that to translate linearly into better health outcomes. So what I advocate for is a market. You need a market in healthcare because then the price system tells you how to best allocate resources. So if there's a particular specialty that there's a shortage of, then their price will go up, and that will attract doctors into that specialty, and then the price will go down. And that's what the price system does. It allocates resources towards the most efficacious ends. And the problem with the Canadian healthcare system is that prices aren't set by supply and demand or market forces. They're determined by fiat, by the state, on what is ultimately an arbitrary basis. So we have a shortage of family doctors. Well, what would happen in a free market is that the price would go up until there was no more shortage. Anybody who wanted to see a family doctor would be able to. It would just cost them more. And then again, the higher rates would attract more potential doctors, either from overseas or attract more people into the medical profession, stop doctors from going to the States. Another issue is licensure. There's a lot of people that are qualified to handle some of the tasks of a doctor, like diagnosing basic illnesses, like nurse practitioners or medical students, that know enough to just take a cursory glance. And if it's, okay, you have a sprained ankle, you do this. If it's something very simple and obvious, they know what to do. And then if it's not, they know to refer it to a doctor, who would then either handle it or refer it to a specialist or whatever. So that's something that would happen organically in a free market type situation, but can't happen under the present system because only a doctor can see patients. And to a degree, they're sort of trialing projects that have nurse practitioners or whatever. They're trying to work their way around it, but it's a problem that was needlessly created by the government in the first place. And then you have the shortages, like she said, 11,000 people on waiting lists. I mean, there are thousands upon thousands of Canadians that die every year waiting to see doctors. And a lot more Canadians are forced to travel overseas or to America in order to pay to jump the queue and get a diagnosis, get treatment, sometimes at extreme expense. So people are able to find a workaround for our dysfunctional system, but it would be a lot better if there was just a market for healthcare here.
Vote for family doctors. And how am I going to do that? By paying them better, bringing more of them, bringing in those internationally trained doctors. They could be your children who are trained in the US or the UK. Let's bring them back home by doubling the residency spaces, by paying our nurses and our PSWs a living wage. But none of that can happen while Doug Ford is premier. So it's time for a change.
All right, Bonnie Crombie, that is your time. Because you mentioned Doug Ford twice, I'll give him 30 seconds to respond to those claims before we move further.
Well, first of all, there's no government in the history of this country that's invested more, 30% more than the previous government. That's over $30 billion. And we ended up going out there, attracting 15,000 new doctors, 100,000 new nurses, 30,000 nursing students in colleges and universities. But I can tell you one.
This is why Canadian politics is so boring, because all the parties agree. We need more doctors. We need foreign trained doctors. We need more residency spots. They all want to spend more money on healthcare. They've all got these plans on how to do it. There's no debate. There's no conflict. It's just people sniping at each other and then saying the same thing, making the same promises.